The music didn't stop this time. But he did. Kim So-hyun, the most feared man in Seoul, the man whose name made boardrooms quiet, and whose past made careful people careful, stood in the middle of a Thursday evening and watched Kate Allison laugh at something the deputy ambassador said, and felt the specific, inconvenient weight of a man who has been wrong about something for 4 years and is only now understanding the full cost of it. He knew that laugh. He had heard it once, maybe twice, in the staff corridor at the back of his estate. He had not stopped to listen. He was listening now. She had ironed his shirts before dawn. She had polished floors she was never invited to walk on as a guest. She had moved through his world like a ghost, not because she was one, but because he had never once looked up long enough to see the difference. That was a year ago. Now her name was on a UN appointment letter. Now 400 people had stood to applaud her. Now she was laughing in a room full of powerful people, and not one of them was looking anywhere else. Including him. The question was no longer whether Kim So-hyun saw her. The question was whether seeing her, truly, fully, too late and then deliberately, was ever going to be enough. Kate Allison no longer set an alarm for 4:47 a.m. Her body had tried to keep the habit the first 2 weeks in the new apartment, waking in the dark, reaching for a uniform that wasn't there, listening for a household that belonged to someone else. The body remembers what the mind is trying to move past. That is simply how bodies work, and Kate, who had spent 4 years making hers as efficient and unobtrusive as possible, did not rush the unlearning. She gave it time. Time, she had discovered, was something she was allowed to have now. By the 3rd week she was sleeping until 6. By the 5th, until her own schedule required otherwise. The apartment had windows that faced outward. She had chosen it specifically for that, not the size, not the location, not the clean lines of the kitchen she had wanted without knowing she was wanting it. The windows. The direction they faced. It had seemed like a small thing when she signed the lease and felt, in the first week of waking up to actual light, like the most significant decision she had made in years. The work had rebuilt itself around her with the focused momentum of something that had been waiting, fully formed, for her to return to it. The consultancy had expanded her scope twice in 6 months. Her name appeared on policy briefs read in rooms she had once prepared coffee for. The research paper, the second half she had left unfinished for 4 years, set down mid-sentence like something she wasn't sure she would pick up again, had been cited in 3 international accountability frameworks since its publication. A UN-affiliated development fund had made an inquiry about an advisory role. She had not yet said yes. She was still learning to receive good things, without immediately looking for where they would cost her. She was, by every visible measure, exactly where she had always been supposed to be. And every Thursday at 7, Kim So-hyun arrived at her door. They walked, or ate somewhere without pretense, or sat in the kind of quiet that takes months to build between 2 people before it stops feeling like silence, and starts feeling like something chosen. He asked about her work with the specific curiosity of someone who was genuinely learning a field rather than performing interest in it. She pushed back on his thinking without softening the push, and he received it the way she had come to understand was not natural to him, but had become deliberate, without the competitive recalibration that powerful men often deployed when a woman treated them as an equal rather than an audience. He simply listened. Asked the next question. Listened again. It was good. Careful and good and built from something real. Neither of them had named it. This was a choice Kate made with the same precision she brought to everything, though she would not have called it a choice if asked. She would have called it prudence. She would have said they were still learning each other, which was true. She would have said there was no need to rush, which was also true, and also not entirely the point. The point, the one she did not examine too directly, was that naming it would require lowering the last wall. And the last wall was the one that had kept her intact through 4 years of everything else, and she had not yet decided whether she trusted the ground enough to set it down. Amara had said this to her once. Not unkindly and not at length. Over the phone on a Sunday morning, in the tone she used when she had assessed a situation completely and was offering the conclusion without the argument. You are managing him the way you manage everything. Controlled distance. Optimal temperature. Just warm enough that no one can accuse you of being cold. A pause. He is not a room full of funders, Kate. You are allowed to let him be something else. Kate had said something deflecting and Amara had let her, which was the thing about Amara. She planted the truth and trusted Kate to grow toward it in her own time. She did not pull. She knew Kate well enough to know that pulling produced exactly nothing. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, midway through a funding accountability report she was 2/3 done with and wanted finished before the end of the day. A journalist she recognized, the one who had written the original Park J1 piece with the thoroughness of someone who had spent real time assembling it. A follow-up article. Further documentation had emerged from the institutional audit. Would Kate be willing to provide a comment on the record? She said yes without hesitating, because she was no longer a woman who hid from her own name. She gave a measured, precise statement. The call lasted 6 minutes. She hung up and returned to the report. She finished it. Sent it. Closed her laptop. She had no way of knowing she had just made herself a target again. The article ran on Thursday morning, clean and fair and thoroughly sourced, the way that journalists' work always was. Kate read it with her coffee at the kitchen table, noted where her statement appeared in the 4th paragraph, and thought nothing further about it. She had a 9 o'clock call, and a site visit report to review before it, and she gave both her full attention. By Friday afternoon the lawyer's email was sitting in her inbox. She almost missed it. It had arrived between a calendar confirmation and a newsletter she hadn't unsubscribed from, formatted in the precise, unhurried language of legal correspondence, the kind of writing designed to communicate gravity through restraint, to make the weight of what it carried feel inevitable rather than aggressive. She read the subject line twice before she opened it. Then she sat very still and read the full email 3 times with the quality of attention she reserved for things that required her to be completely accurate about what she was seeing before she allowed herself to react to it. Park J1 was filing a civil challenge to the audit findings. The legal team was mounting a targeted challenge to the witness accounts underpinning the audit's conclusions. The filing was coordinated and expensive and aimed, with a precision that was not accidental, directly at her credibility. She was the primary witness. The strategy was not complicated once you understood it: dismantle her account, and the audit's human architecture weakened regardless of the documentary evidence surrounding it. It was, she recognized with the cold clarity of someone who had studied this mechanism from the inside, the same logic as the original accusation. Different suit. Identical structure. She closed the laptop. She put on her coat and walked for 40 minutes along the Han River without her phone, which was what she did when she needed to let the first layer of a thing burn off before she could see what was underneath it. The river was grey and unhurried in the late afternoon light, and she matched its pace without deciding to, hands in her pockets, her breath visible in the autumn air. She did not perform calm. She simply walked until the panic finished, and what remained, as it always did, was structure. Problem. Variables. Response. She was not the woman who had received the first accusation in a shared office with no allies, no warning, and 4 years of work about to be unmade beneath her. She had lawyers now. She had documentation that was thorough in the way that only someone who had been wronged once and learned from it could make thorough. She had a professional reputation rebuilt in public over 18 months of consistent, visible, excellent work. She had, in every practical sense, more to fight with. She held on to that. She came back to it deliberately, the way you come back to solid ground when the surface beneath you shifts. What she had not prepared for was the speed of the withdrawal. It started the following Monday. A funder she had been in final conversations with, a 2-month process, nearly concluded, went quiet in the particular way that institutions go quiet when they are calculating exposure rather than communicating directly. A speaking invitation, she had confirmed 3 weeks prior, developed sudden scheduling complications that the organizer delivered with the uncomfortable warmth of someone delivering something they knew was dishonest. A program director, who had pursued her collaboration specifically and enthusiastically, stopped responding to emails without explanation. She watched it happen with the cold clarity of someone who recognized every step of the choreography. The professional world's instinct for self-preservation was not malicious. That was almost the worst part of it. The people withdrawing were not her enemies. They were simply, efficiently, cowardly, in the way that institutions trained people to be cowardly by rewarding the avoidance of complexity over every other response to it. They were moving away from association with controversy regardless of merit, the same way they had 4 years ago, the same reflex, the same fundamental failure dressed in different circumstances. She was not destroyed by it. She had always known this was the risk of becoming visible, that visibility in one direction meant visibility in all of them. But she was tired. Not the brittle exhaustion of crisis, but something deeper and more specific, the particular weariness of a woman who has already paid a debt she never owed and is being handed the bill again with the same practiced neutrality as the first time. The tiredness that has no clean name because the language around it kept defaulting to words like resilience, which asked the wrong person to carry the weight of the wrong thing. She did not tell Sahayan. Thursday arrived and he came to her door at 7, as he always did, and they walked their usual route along the river path, and she was, by every observable measure, completely fine. She asked about his week and engaged with his answer, and said something that made him laugh, and was present in all the ways she had learned to be present when she was actually somewhere else entirely. He said nothing about any of it. But she caught him watching her, twice, with the particular focused stillness he used when he was assembling something he did not yet have all the pieces for. Not suspicious. Not pushing. Simply attentive in the way he had learned to be attentive, across a year of deliberate practice, to the specific frequency of her. He already knew something was wrong. He was waiting for her to trust him with it. She walked beside him in the cool evening air, and said nothing and told herself it was because she had it handled. He found out on a Monday. Not from her. His legal team flagged the filing as a matter of routine professional awareness. Kate's name appeared in documents adjacent to entities the Kim Foundation had previously engaged with, and his lawyers were thorough in the way that people paid to protect powerful men were thorough. They delivered the summary in the same measured tone they used for everything. He read it in the back of his car on the way to a 10 o'clock meeting, and he read it again, and then he sat there in the idling car outside the building while his driver waited in the particular trained silence of someone who understood that questions were not part of his job description. He was 8 minutes late to the meeting. No one who worked for him could remember that happening before. They noted it without commenting on it, the way people in his orbit noted most things, carefully, privately, and without letting him see that they had noticed. He called her at noon. She answered on the second ring with the quality of composure he had learned, across 7 months of Thursday evenings, to distinguish from actual composure. The surface was identical. The texture underneath was not. He had spent a year learning to read the difference, and he read it now without effort, and without letting her know he had. He did not ask about Park J1. He did not open with the filing, or the legal strategy, or any of the practical elements that would have given the conversation a shape she could manage. He simply said her name, and then, how long? Not a question. A statement wearing a question's clothing. She understood immediately, and did not pretend otherwise. Since last Tuesday, she said. The silence that followed was brief and cost something on both ends. He let it cost him visibly, which was something she had come to understand was not natural to him and had become, over the course of this year, a choice he made specifically with her. "Why didn't you tell me?" And there it was. The conversation they had been not having for 7 months, arriving now without the careful conditions she would have chosen for it, without the controlled timing and measured distance she would have used to make it feel safer. It arrived as things between them increasingly arrived, directly, because they had built, without quite deciding to, the kind of honesty that made the long way around feel dishonest. She answered him the way she had stopped answering everyone else, without the performance of competence she used as armor in every other context, without the careful framing that made vulnerability look like information. "I built everything I have without needing anyone," she said. "Every piece of it. And I didn't want to find out where my strength ended and yours began. I didn't want to reach for you and then not be able to tell anymore what was mine and what I had borrowed." She stopped. Then the thing underneath that, quieter, the thing she had not said out loud before because saying it out loud made it real. "And I was afraid that if I let you in and you left, I wouldn't know anymore what was mine. I've rebuilt myself once. I didn't want to have to rebuild around a shape you left behind." "You are standing in the dark alone and calling it independence," he said. "Those are not the same thing. You know they are not." She did not answer immediately. The words landed with the particular precision of something that had been true for a long time, and had simply been waiting for someone to say it clearly enough. "Let me in, Kate." His voice was quiet. Not a demand. Not a negotiation. Not to fix it. "I know you don't need that and I know you wouldn't want it. Just let me in." She sat with it. With the specific weight of what he was asking, which was not help and not rescue, and not the management of her situation by someone with more resources. He was asking for the one thing she had not yet been willing to give. Not access to the problem. Access to her. After the call she sat in the apartment for a long time without moving. The evening was settling outside the windows that faced outward and the city was doing what the city always did, indifferent and luminous, and entirely unconcerned with the thing she was trying to decide. She was not deciding whether he was trustworthy. She knew he was trustworthy. That had never been the question, though she had let herself believe it was because it was a more manageable question than the real one. The real one was this: whether she was willing to be that known by someone who could leave. Whether the risk that had no documentation, no audit trail, no formal process for appeal, the risk that lived entirely outside the systems she had spent her career learning to navigate, was one she was finally ready to take. Whether the last wall, the one that had kept her intact through everything, was a protection anymore or simply a habit she had mistaken for one. She picked up her phone. 2 words. "Come over." Something had been bothering her about the lawyers. She had not named it immediately, had let it sit at the edge of her attention the way she let all incomplete things sit, trusting that her mind would finish assembling it when it had enough pieces. It took 4 days. She was reviewing a funding disbursement report for the consultancy, moving through figures with the automatic fluency of someone for whom financial structure was a first language, when the thing that had been bothering her finally surfaced and became a question she could actually hold. Park J1's legal team was too good. Not competent. Exceptional. The strategy was coordinated with a precision that required both resources and foreknowledge, the specific targeting of witness accounts rather than documentary evidence, the careful timing relative to her UN advisory consideration, the way each filing built on the previous one with the architectural logic of something designed rather than improvised. She knew what a man in Park's position could afford. She knew what professional ruin looked like as a financial condition. The lawyers he had retained did not match the profile of a man whose career had been formally dismantled by an institutional audit 6 months prior. Someone was funding this. Someone with resources and a reason that went beyond Park J1's personal grievance. She followed the money because she had always followed the money. It was the skill at the center of everything she had built, the ability to move through complex financial structures and find where the threads terminated, to read a disbursement record the way other people read sentences, for meaning rather than just content. She applied it now not as a professional exercise, but with the quiet focus of a woman who understood that her survival, again, depended on seeing clearly. The thread appeared in a grant disbursement record from a regional development consortium, cross-referenced against a foundation partnership filing. She recognized the moment she saw it. She recognized it because she had spent 3 years organizing documents from the same building. She had filed the original partnership agreement herself, in the East Wing office, on a Tuesday morning before the household woke. She followed it carefully. A disbursement to a program consultancy. The consultancy's registration traced to a holding entity. The holding entity, through a secondary partnership agreement filed 18 months prior, connected to a name she had to look up the first time, and did not need to look up again. Choi Byung-soo. She read everything available on him in 2 hours. A fixer and facilitator in Seoul's development funding ecosystem, not a name that appeared in headlines, which was precisely the point of men like him. His money moved through foundations and partnerships and event sponsorships with the practiced invisibility of someone who had spent a decade learning how institutions laundered proximity into legitimacy. His name appeared in the Kim Foundation's partnership records in 3 places across 4 years. His financial fingerprints were on funding channels that, she understood with increasing clarity as she read, were exactly the channels the UN Advisory Board's first governance mandate was designed to audit. She was not a threat to Park J1. She had never been only a threat to Park J1. She checked it 4 times. Then she sat at her kitchen table for a long time without moving, looking at what she had built across her screen, understanding its full shape. Then she called Sahayan. She did not accuse. She had made that decision before she dialed, that she would tell him what she found and ask him one question, and receive his answer before she allowed herself to conclude anything. She told him methodically, the way she presented findings professionally, without editorial and without emotion. The thread. The consultancy. The holding entity. Choi's name and where it appeared, and what it meant relative to the advisory board. Then she asked, "Did you know?" The silence before he answered was long enough to be its own kind of answer. Not guilt. Something more complicated than guilt. He told her the truth. Not the clean version, not the version shaped to protect his position, but the full account delivered in the flat tone of a man who had decided that she was owed accuracy over comfort. He had known Choi peripherally for years, a name in the Foundation's orbit, a facilitator, whose money arrived through proper channels, and whose associations he had not examined closely because the money was clean on the surface, and he had been, he said, a man who looked where things were clear and did not ask questions about the edges. He told her the specific moments where the question had been available to him. A conversation 2 years ago, where something Choi said had not quite resolved. A partnership renewal he had approved without reading the secondary agreements. The comfortable incuriosity, he called it, of a man with enough authority to decide what was and was not his concern. He did not qualify it. He did not explain it into something smaller than it was. "I didn't build this with you," he said. "But I was close enough to benefit from proximity to it." That's not clean. She heard it cost him. She did not look away from the fact that it should. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the city outside her windows completed its own rhythm of sound and settled into something lower and less insistent. "I believe you," she said finally. "I don't know yet what to do with that. But I believe you." She did not ask him to leave. That was the whole of it, in the end. The thread she had followed to its terminus. The truth she had asked for and received without softening. The man on the other end of the line, who had handed her the most unflattering version of himself and waited. She did not ask him to leave. Amara arrived at 9 with a laptop bag over one shoulder, and the particular expression she wore when she had decided something was going to happen, and was simply waiting for the circumstances to catch up with her decision. She had offered to help Kate organize the legal documentation. That was the stated reason. Kate had accepted because the documentation needed organizing and because she understood, after 15 years of friendship, that when Amara showed up with that expression there was always something beneath the stated reason, and that the something beneath it was always more important. They worked for the first hour without getting to it. Kate's files were extensive and needed a logic that would hold up under legal scrutiny, chronological, cross-referenced, each piece of evidence connected to the claim it supported with the kind of clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. Amara was good at this. She thought in structures the way Kate thought in structures, and they moved through the documentation with the efficient shorthand of two people who had been solving problems together long enough to have developed their own language for it. The coffee went cold. Kate made more. The city outside the windows had settled into its late evening register, lower, less insistent, the particular frequency of a place that had finished its public face for the day. It was Amara who went quiet first. Not her working quiet, which had a texture to it, the occasional murmur, the soft percussion of keys, the small sounds of concentrated thought. This was different. Kate noticed it the way she noticed most things, without making it visible that she had noticed, and continued working, and waited. He did it again, Amara said. On Thursday. The regional stakeholder presentation, the maternal health framework I've been building for 8 months. He presented it. Not as mine with his input. As the team's, which in that room, with those funders, in the way he said it, meant his. Kate set down her pen. I've been documenting it, Amara continued, with the flatness of someone who has rehearsed the factual version of a thing specifically to avoid the emotional version. Every instance. Dates, meeting attendees, the language he used versus the language in my original designs. I submitted it to HR in August. She paused. They told me that collaborative work environments often produce shared ownership of ideas, and that I might be experiencing the situation through a lens shaped by stress. The silence that followed had a specific quality. Kate knew the shape of what Amara had just described, not from the outside, as someone hearing it for the first time, but from the inside, from the cellular memory of having been told, through institutional language of great professional warmth, that what she was accurately observing was in fact a misreading produced by her own limitations. How long? Kate said. 2 years. A beat. I didn't tell you because you had enough. And then you had more than enough. And then I kept not telling you because I had been not telling you for so long that saying it felt like, she stopped. Looked at the table. I didn't want to be the one who needed something. That was supposed to be my thing. Being the one who didn't need anything. Kate looked at her across the table. At the woman who had shown up with a garment bag and a jewelry case and the absolute certainty that time was up. Who had planted truths and waited without impatience for Kate to grow toward them. Who had been, for 15 years and through everything, the most reliably steady presence in Kate's life, not because nothing touched her, Kate understood now, but because she had decided, at some point and for reasons that were becoming clear, that steadiness was the thing she owed everyone around her, including herself. Tell me everything, Kate said. From the beginning. Amara told her. All of it, in the order it happened, without the careful editing she had been applying for 2 years to make it sound more manageable than it was. The first incident and the second. The HR process and the warmly delivered invalidation. The way the colleague moved through the organization, with the frictionless confidence of a man who had never once been asked to doubt his own account of events. The specific exhaustion of being told, repeatedly and by people who considered themselves fair, that she was the variable most likely to be misreading the situation. By the time she finished, it was past 11. The documentation was half organized on the table between them. Kate was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's the same mechanism." Amara looked up. "Different organization, different sector, different man. Same architecture. Same institutional bet." Kate's voice was even. "That we'll decide it costs too much. That we'll calculate the energy required and conclude it isn't worth it and find a way to adjust ourselves around the obstruction." Amara's expression settled into something that was not quite bitterness, and not quite recognition, and was precisely the combination of both. "They keep winning," she said, with a flatness more devastating than anger would have been, "because they're counting on us to decide it isn't worth it." Kate looked at her across the cold coffee, and the organized evidence, and the late-night quiet of the apartment with the outward-facing windows. "Then we make it worth it." They worked until 2. By the time Amara's car arrived, they had 2 plans, both solid, both built for endurance rather than drama, both aimed precisely at the mechanism rather than the men operating it, because the mechanism was the point and always had been. At the door, Kate held her for a moment longer than usual. Amara, for the first time in longer than either of them acknowledged, looked like herself. The 6 weeks did not feel like 6 weeks. They felt like a particular kind of weather, persistent, low pressure, the sort that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but changes the quality of every day it occupies. Kate moved through them the way she moved through everything that required endurance rather than speed, methodically, completely, without leaving anything to chance. Her documentation was exhaustive in the way that only someone who had been wronged once by the absence of it could make exhaustive. Every claim supported. Every timeline precise. Every piece of evidence connected to the next with the architectural logic of someone who understood that a case was not a collection of facts, but a structure, and that structures either held under pressure, or they didn't, and she had built this one to hold. Her lawyers were excellent, and she made them more excellent by being the kind of client who arrived prepared, who understood the filings before they explained them, who asked the questions that moved things forward rather than the questions that required management. But what was ultimately unmanageable was not the documentation. It was her. She appeared at every proceeding with the composed certainty of someone who had already survived the worst version of this particular mechanism, and was no longer afraid of any version below it. She responded to every filing with evidence rather than emotion, with precision rather than the defensive urgency that opposing counsel was clearly hoping to provoke. She was not performing calm. She had simply been through enough to know the difference between a situation that was dangerous and a situation that was designed to feel dangerous, and she had stopped allowing the design to determine her response. The challenge began losing structural integrity in the 4th week. She could see it in the filings, a subtle shift in the legal strategy, a narrowing of the claims, the particular quality of legal language that retreats without admitting it is retreating. Something had changed in the resources available to Park's team. The precision that had characterized the early filings softened. The coordination that had suggested external architecture began to show gaps. She noted it without commenting on it to anyone, and continued working. Choi Byung-se's backing evaporated somewhere in the 5th week, for reasons she did not yet fully understand and filed away to understand later. Without it, Park could not sustain the quality of legal opposition the challenge required. The withdrawal came in the 6th week, on a Wednesday, with the same absence of drama with which the whole mechanism had ultimately failed, not a confrontation, not a concession speech, simply a formal notification delivered through proper channels in the language of legal process, which was the only language it had ever spoken. Kate received it at 11:43 in the morning, in the middle of a funding accountability report she was 2/3 through, and wanted finished before the end of the day. Her phone screen lit with her lawyer's name, and she set down her pen, and read the notification he forwarded without standing up. She read it once. Set the phone down. picked it up and read it again to be accurate about what she was seeing. Then she called him, confirmed the details in 4 questions, and hung up. She returned to the report. She finished it. She read it through once for errors, found 2, corrected them, read it again. Then she sent it and closed her laptop, and sat in the quiet of the apartment in the middle of a Wednesday, and let herself stop. The release was physical. She had not anticipated that, had expected something cleaner, more intellectual. A sense of conclusion arrived through reason. Instead it moved through her body like something structural shifting, like a posture she had been holding for so long she had stopped feeling it as effort and only now, in its absence, understood how much it had been costing her. She sat with it. She did not rush it or manage it or reframe it into something more presentable. She cried, briefly and without drama, in the way you cry when the thing you have been bracing for is finally over, and your body understands, before the rest of you does, that it is allowed to stop bracing. It lasted perhaps 2 minutes. Then it was done and she sat in the quiet, with her eyes dry and her shoulders different than they had been an hour ago. She picked up her phone and texted Amara 4 words, "It's done. We won." The response arrived in 8 seconds. It was mostly punctuation, a specific sequence that communicated everything it needed to communicate without requiring language, and it was exactly right. She sat for another moment. Then she scrolled to Sahayan's name. She did not call him to report. She had no information he needed and no update that required delivery. She did not call to thank him, though there were things he had done that warranted it, and she would find the words for them eventually. She called him simply because he was the person she wanted to call. She noticed that. Held it for a moment before the call connected, turned it over with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. Wanting, specifically and without practical justification, to hear his voice. Not needing it. Wanting it. That was new. She noticed it was new. The consortium director called on a Saturday morning, which was unusual enough that Kate answered with more attention than she might have given a weekday call. He did not open with pleasantries. He was not a man who used pleasantries as anything other than strategy, and with Kate he had long since decided strategy was unnecessary. He told her what he had heard, in the efficient manner of someone reporting confirmed intelligence rather than circulating rumor. Choi Byung-soo had been removed from the Kim Foundation's orbit. Comprehensively. Partnerships dissolved, event affiliations ended, the secondary consultancy agreements terminated without explanation or negotiation. The kind of institutional severance that, in Seoul's professional world, did not require a press release because its meaning traveled faster without one. "I thought you should know," he said. "Given the circumstances." She thanked him and ended the call and sat with it for a moment. She called him at noon. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had been expecting her call, which meant he understood her well enough to know she would have found out and would not let it sit. "You could have made it public," she said. "There would have been value in that. It would have said something clear about where the foundation stands. It would have helped your reputation considerably." "I didn't do it for my reputation. I know that. I'm telling you that you could have and chose not to." She paused. "You didn't do it for me either. I didn't ask you to." "No," he said. "I did it because my world was adjacent to something corrupt and I had the ability to address it. That's not heroism. It's just the minimum." She sat with that for a moment. The minimum. She turned the word over with the attention it deserved. She had known powerful men her entire professional life, had worked for them, around them, had rebuilt her career in the spaces between their decisions and their blind spots. She knew what they sounded like when they were being generous, and she knew what they sounded like when they were being strategic about appearing generous, and she knew the difference between the two with the precision of someone who had learned it through necessity rather than cynicism. What she was hearing was neither. It was a man describing the floor he held himself to, not the ceiling, not the exceptional gesture, but the basic standard below which he had decided he would not go, and doing it without expectation of credit. She thought about how rare that was. How quietly extraordinary the ordinary version of integrity became when it was practiced by someone with enough power to ignore it comfortably. "Thursday," she said. "7, he said. "I'll come to you this time." What Kate did not know, and would not know for some time, was the conversation that had preceded it. His oldest advisor was a man named Shin, who had known him since before the suits and the watch and the authority, since the years when the neck tattoo was new and the power was something being built rather than something being maintained. Shin occupied no official role in his organization, and was therefore the only person in his life who spoke to him without the filter of professional consequence. They had met the previous Tuesday, in the unremarkable restaurant near Shin's office, where they had met for 15 years. So-hyun had told him about Choi. About what Kate had found and what it meant, and what he intended to do about it. Shin had listened without interrupting, which was his way, and had been quiet for a moment after. "You're different," Shin said. Not as observation. As conclusion. So-hyun had not argued with it because it was accurate, and because Shin had known him long enough that argument would have been transparent. He was different. Not transformed. Transformation implied a clean before and after, a single moment of change, and that was not what had happened. What had happened was slower and less dramatic and more durable than transformation. He had spent a year being genuinely known by someone who required nothing from him except honesty, and it had changed the quality of his attention. He was slower to conclude. He asked questions he had previously classified as outside his concern. He had begun looking at the edges of his world, the places where things happened that powerful men learned to not examine directly, with the uncomfortable interest of someone who had realized that not looking was itself a choice. He was adjusting. To what accuracy required of him? To what proximity to a woman like Kate made impossible to continue avoiding? Shin had looked at him across the table with the expression of someone whose long investment had returned something unexpected and worthwhile. "She's good for you," he said simply. So-hyun had picked up his coffee. "I know," he said. The email arrived at 7:43 on a Wednesday morning. Kate was at her kitchen table with coffee and a governance briefing she was annotating for a meeting later that week. Her phone lit beside her laptop, and she glanced at it with the partial attention she gave most notifications at this hour, registered the sender, and set down her pen. She read it once. Then she set the phone face down on the table, and sat for a moment with her hands around her coffee cup and the morning light coming through the windows that faced outward. Then she picked the phone up and read it again, slowly, giving each line the full weight it carried. She set the phone down again. Picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She thought about the room at the back of the estate. Not the gala. Not the red dress and the chandelier light, and the room full of people turning without meaning to. That night had been a beginning, but it was not where the real work had happened. The real work had happened before it, in 4 years of small and unwitnessed decisions made in a narrow room, with a window that faced a garden wall instead of the world. The alarm at 4:47. The dark. The uniform on the hook beside the door, and the marble floors she had learned to cross without sound because she had trained herself, with the focused efficiency of someone whose survival required it, to move through that building like something that did not fully exist. She thought about the professional journals she had kept reading throughout, not because she believed with certainty that she was going to return to the work, but because stopping felt like a concession she was not willing to make. The decision, unannounced and unwitnessed and made again every morning, to remain intact. To not become what the accusation had tried to make her. To keep the part of herself that knew what she was worth in a place where no one and nothing could reach it. That was where the advisory board appointment had actually been won. Not in the ballroom. In the 4 years before it. She sat with that for a long time. With the specific quality of a morning that had turned into something she would remember. The city outside the windows was already fully in motion. She could hear the particular texture of it, the lead sound of a place that did not pause for individual reckonings, indifferent and luminous, and entirely unconcerned with the woman at the kitchen table who had just been handed back something that should never have been taken. She made fresh coffee. She finished her annotations. She went to her meeting. He arrived at 7 precisely, which was how he arrived, not early, not late, time as a form of respect rather than a performance of it. She opened the door, and he looked at her face with the focused attention he had spent a year learning to bring to it, reading it the way he now read most things that mattered to him, completely, without rushing to the conclusion. "Good news," he said. Not a question. "Very good news," she confirmed. He held out the flowers. Simple, unextravagant, in the particular variety she had mentioned once in a conversation about something else entirely, a passing comment she had not expected anyone to retain. He had retained it because paying attention was something he had decided to do, and did not do partially. She took them and stepped aside, and he came in, and she put the flowers in the only vase she owned, and they ate at the kitchen table with the easy fluency of two people who had learned each other's rhythms without making a project of it. They talked about her new scope and the governance frameworks she was already thinking about, and a funding structure he had encountered that week that he found ethically questionable, and wanted her analysis of. She gave it directly, and he disagreed with part of it, and said why, and she revised one position, and held the other, and he accepted both responses, with the equanimity of a man who had learned that being challenged by her was not a contest. Later the conversation quieted into the comfortable register it found at the end of evenings like this one. The city moved outside the windows. The kitchen held the warmth of the meal and the late hour, and something that had no precise name, and did not require one. "I am proud of you," he said. She looked at him. "I didn't do it for that." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I said it." She received it without deflecting. That was new too, and she noticed it was new, and she let it be. Outside, Seoul continued in its indifferent, luminous way. Inside, two people sat at a table in a kitchen in an apartment with outward-facing windows, both of them, finally and without announcement, exactly where they were supposed to be. The piece took 4 mornings to write. Kate had not planned it that way. She had sat down on the first morning with the intention of completing it in a single session. She had always written quickly, thinking on paper, with the same structured fluency she brought to financial analysis. And the journal's word count was not excessive. But she found, on that first morning and the one after it, that this particular piece required something different from her. Not more time to find the words. More honesty about which words were the true ones, and which were the managed version of them. The difference mattered, and she kept finding it, and kept choosing the true ones, and the choosing took the time it took. She wrote about systems. Not her story. She was precise about that distinction from the first paragraph, because her story was not the point, and she had no interest in centering it as though it were. The mechanism was the point. The specific, repeatable architecture, by which institutions identified competence as a threat and processed it accordingly, not through malice, which would have been simpler, but through process. Through concerns raised and procedures followed and outcomes reached via proper channels. The whole machinery of professional harm dressed so thoroughly in the language of fairness that the people operating it could, and often did, believe themselves to be reasonable. That was what made it function so consistently. Not the bad actors, though they existed. The institutional structures that made bad actors viable. She wrote about cost. Not what 4 years had cost her personally, because that accounting was incomplete and always would be. What it had cost the work. The funding accountability frameworks not built. The policy recommendations not written. The programs not improved. The people in the field, real people, in real places, making do with systems that could have been better, who had needed more rigorous governance infrastructure, and had not gotten it because the person who would have built it was ironing shirts before dawn in someone else's house. She wrote that the world does not only lose the person when it tolerates this. It loses everything that person would have built. That number appeared in no audit. No formal exoneration restored it. She wrote about the gala. About what the red dress had actually been, stripped of the story people preferred to tell about it, not glamour, not triumph, not the aesthetics of a woman reclaiming herself in a single dramatic gesture. A choice. Made not in the ballroom, but in a narrow room at the back of an estate at the moment she picked up a cream-colored envelope and decided, quietly and without audience, that she was worth the risk of being seen. She wrote that visibility was not the same as discovery. Discovery was something that happened to you. Visibility was something you chose, and everything that followed, the consultancy, the research, the advisory board, all of it, had come from the choice rather than from the room's reaction to it. The room's reaction was not the point. The choice was the point. It always had been. She wrote about Amara. Not comprehensively, because some things belonged to the two of them and to no one else. But she wrote about what it meant to have someone who told you the truth before you were ready to hear it and waited, without impatience or performance, for you to grow toward it. About women in kitchens late at night doing the real work, the unglamorous, undocumented, unwitnessed work of refusing together in the ordinary dark. About the specific, irreplaceable value of being known by someone who had watched you at your most diminished and had never once adjusted their estimation of you accordingly. She wrote about him without naming him. About what it meant to be known by someone who could have continued not knowing you and chose differently. About learning to receive that, to let someone's attention land without immediately converting it into something you managed from a distance. About how that had required the same decision the gala had required, made more quietly and with higher stakes, to stop making yourself smaller than you are. To trust that the ground holds even when you cannot document the evidence for it. To understand that the last wall, the one you built to survive, is not the same thing as the self it was built to protect. She ended with the only conclusion that felt accurate. She wrote that she had been asked, more times than she could count, to frame her story as one of resilience, and that she resisted this every time. That resilience centered the survivor and asked for admiration, while saying nothing about who had dug the hole, or which institutions had handed out the shovels. That she was not interested in being admired for surviving something she should not have been put through. That she was interested in the whole, in who built it, how it functioned, and why the systems surrounding it kept protecting the people holding the shovels. That those mechanisms were not exceptional. They were ordinary. They were operating right now in organizations that considered themselves progressive, in sectors that considered themselves ethical, to people who had not yet found their envelope under the door. That what she wanted was not a world that celebrated the women who survived this. That what she wanted was a world that refused to create the conditions in the first place. She wrote, "Do the work. Tell the truth. Take up exactly the space you are owed. And when someone slides an envelope under your door with your full name on it, printed like it means something, because it does, do not mistake fear for wisdom. Walk through the door." The piece was published on a Thursday. Kate read it at her kitchen table at 7 in the morning, in the apartment with the outward-facing windows, with coffee that was still warm. She read it the way she read her own finished work, not for pride, not for reassurance, but for accuracy. To confirm that what had been published was what she had meant. It was. She set her phone down. Picked up her coffee. Outside, Sol was already in motion, indifferent, luminous, entirely unconcerned with the woman at the table who had just put the last 4 years into permanent sentences, and sent them into the world. She was already part of it. That was enough.